Every club, every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.
Welcome back to the Global Sports Podcast Network Daily English Premier League podcast. We've got a new man on the block today. It's Viktor. Welcome to the team.
Thank you, Nick. Good to meet you finally and looking ahead of everything that's going to happen with GSPN. Excited about the future.
Yeah, so we're going to be looking towards Champions League today. We got a bit of a Champions League expert. You told me beforehand, winner of Fantasy Champions League. Tell us a bit about that so the audience get to know a bit more about you.
Yeah, so I'm originally from Macedonia. I moved to the US maybe 15 years ago on a football scholarship. So I played in a college in Florida. Then I moved to Chicago where I graduated and been here ever since. About fantasy, I won the Fantasy Champions League on Eurosport in 2008. At the time, it was still, I would say, small. There was like 110,000 people playing. Compared to now, you have like 2.5 million for the Fantasy Champions League. You have 11.5 for the Premier League. So big difference. But still, 110,000. It was a big win for me.
Yeah.
Especially knowing that as a Man United fan, in the last round, it was obviously the Man United-Chelsea final. And I had Lampard on my team. The other guy that was super close to me had Wesley Brown, so he got an assist for the Ronaldo goal, and at that time I was second. So then when Lampard scored, I was kind of bittersweet because obviously I'm going first place fantasy, but then Chelsea tied the game. I didn't want United not to win the Champions League.
You got over the line in the end, though. Yeah. That's the important part.
And United won. So
yeah, of course.
Everything turned out perfectly.
Yeah. So kicking off, we're going to touch on, I think, the most interesting part of this final Champions League game week, which is Man City. So they're going into this sitting outside the top 24, playing Brugge at home. They have to win to qualify.
Yeah.
And it feels like a tougher task than it should be for them, especially when you're looking at Brugge. They're unbeaten in all competitions in their last 16 games.
Yeah,
this might not be as easy as it should be for Man City.
No, it looks easy on paper, but yeah, they undefeated for 16, 17 games, and those 16 games are not just the Belgium league. It's like they did not lose against Juventus. They beat Aston Villa. They tied it, I believe, Celtic, and they even beat Sporting Lisbon. So yeah, it can be a tough game, especially knowing that Club Brugge also needs to stay undefeated to go through. So we'll see. I think City will find a way to win the game, but it's not going to be as easy as people think it will be.
Yeah, so just to touch on how City even got here for people who may not have paid it as much attention, they obviously started off with a 0-0 draw at Inter. This when Rodri was still fit. That's a good result. My team Arsenal went away to Inter, lost 1-0 to a penalty, and I wasn't too annoyed. Obviously, for me, Inter, one of the top favourites for this tournament, and then they start their matches without Rodri, obviously post his ACL. 4-0 win versus Bratislava away, 5-0 win at home to Sparta Prague, and then it starts to turn around. They obviously lose 4-1 away at Sporting. The 3-3 at Feyenoord feels like a massive game in this run. The 2-0 away at Juve also feels pretty big because this isn't a great Juve team. And then obviously last week, the 4-2 loss at PSG. 3 of these games they've blown a lead. In the Sporting one, they were 1-0 up, obviously 3-0 Feyenoord and 2-0 last week at PSG. They've not really got anyone else to blame but themselves, even with this Rodri injury that's sort of ruined their season.
It's crazy just how they fell apart, to be honest with you. At the beginning of the season looked like it's just they're gonna win everything again this year, and just out of nowhere, yeah, they're not organized. And even that loss last week, it was shocking to have the lead 0-2 that quick, and then within 30 minutes to concede 4 goals. That's, yeah, you know definitely something is off, way off.
Yeah, because
a team like that.
Because a lot of the games they've blown away, not even just in the Champions League, but in the Premier League, they've been the better team still. And last week, they weren't the better team. They were lucky to be 2-0 up, and PSG eventually got what they deserved and turned it around. But do you think the game of the weekend against Chelsea, I think Chelsea made some they tactically managed that game completely wrong, in my opinion, going man-to-man. But do you think City can take confidence from that going into this game tomorrow?
Yeah, definitely. That was a big result for them going forward, and seems like Foden is getting into good form again, which is a big thing for them. Yeah, I think they'll find a way to go through, and then it's going to get tricky. If they find their form, even finishing like 21, 22, 23, they can still cause trouble, especially because if you finish 9 and 10, you play 23, 24, and then you play 7 and 8. So they can still easily get through 7 and 8. So we'll see how it
Yeah,
goes. But
that was something I wanted to touch on later. They might have accidentally given themselves a really easy knockouts run, because
yep,
if they come 24th, they might play one of those poor teams in the 9th, 10th sort of area. I'm looking at Lille, I'm looking at Brest. Feyenoord, obviously, they drew against, but they were 3-0 up. Like, they're clearly a better team than them. And then playing 7th or 8th, I think I'm looking at some of these teams in the top 8. Not all of them are great teams. AC Milan, I don't quite understand how they've got there. They're not very good. I think they're looking a bit better under Conceição, but they're not a good team. You'd expect City, especially how their season normally goes, they get better later into the season. You're
Italian
looking at
teams in
this
general, they're pretty compact and organized in European competitions, and I think it comes to experience as well. If you play against
yeah,
Milan in Europe, Milan is Milan still, no matter how
yeah,
bad they
exactly.
are. Yeah,
And then say they get through that game, they play likely Barca or Liverpool, but Barca or Liverpool might have just come off a game against a Real Madrid, a Bayern, a Juve, who are in that middle
yeah,
cluster. Something we'll get onto later about how weird that middle playoff section is. So much can change, and it's something really difficult to predict at the moment. But I mean, City may have just lucked themselves into
yeah.
a somewhat easy stroll to the quarterfinals of this competition, despite being terrible, quite frankly.
I mean, you can turn it around pretty quick. You get that form again, and then you're pretty much going forward strong. So
Yeah, especially being able to register Marmouche, Kusanov. Obviously, he didn't look
he
great
looks
at the
very
weekend. He's
solid.
a much better player than he showed at the weekend.
I think
This,
he's going to be very solid. They clearly
yeah,
got someone that they're going to take De Bruyne's place, and he looked very lively, to be honest with you. I did not expect he's going to go into the lineup like that and just show his quality right away. Great
no,
for him.
I had some concerns. It got cut out in the episode I did with Mikey last week with the technical problems we had. But I had some concerns about going from a Frankfurt team who are so counter-attacking into this team who controls the game so much. And it felt like the perfect first game for him. It was one of the more transitional games you'll ever see from City. So it really suited him. It'll be interesting to see how that goes going forward. But he was so exciting, and which is slightly
Yeah.
concerning considering we play them at the weekend. But we'll look ahead to Aston Villa now. But first, let's hear from Zencastr.
Here at the Global Sports Podcast Network, we spent a lot of time selecting our delivery platform. Zencastr came out as the clear winner. With 4K video recording from your phone and AI editing that automatically removes all those ums and ahs, it's super easy to start a podcast that sounds great and is delivered efficiently. If you're ready to tell your story, check out the link in the description to learn more about Zencastr.
So, looking at the top 8, those teams who will go straight into the final 16, obviously Liverpool, Barca, and essentially Arsenal are already through. Arsenal would have to have 5 of 6 results go against them, including a 7+ goal difference swing. So we're going to consider them already through. Then you look
Yeah.
at Inter are playing Monaco 4th versus 10th, where a draw is enough for Inter, and there'd have to be a goal difference swing in it if they lose. That's one of the only games I'm looking at where there could be a bit of a swing. I don't know if you see the same thing.
I think everyone has something to play for except for Liverpool, to be honest with you, because Liverpool will end up being first or second, and then you pretty much are going to be on the different like bracket compared to like Barcelona. If you finish 1 and 2, you can never play Barcelona in the 1 and 2 will eventually in the quarterfinal play 7 or 8. So, yeah. I love this format, to be honest with you. My friends hate it. I absolutely love this format. And I think it's kind of like a response by UEFA because of the Super League and how they felt like something bigger is coming. So they had to find a way to kind of get something new and more exciting. And this is exactly what it is.
Yeah, I think it's been really, really interesting. There's obviously a few detractors, I think, when you're looking at City. It's something we can come on to later. Then you look at Atletico Madrid in 5th. They're playing Salzburg, already out. AC Milan playing Zagreb, who are essentially out. They should be fine. Same for Leverkusen against Sparta Prague. The only game where you could see one of those top 8 drop out is Atalanta, who are in 7th playing Barca in 2nd.
Yeah,
and this feels like it could ultimately come down to how much Barca go for it in this game. They haven't tied up 2nd, so they can't really afford to rotate.
Exactly.
And, I mean, obviously, Atalanta are a very good side this year. It's in Bergamo. This feels like a hard game to call, and it's ultimately the only chance Aston Villa seem to have of getting into that top 8. They currently sit 9th on 13 points, but if Barca can do them a favour, then Villa can find a way into this top 8.
Yeah. Villa has a good goal difference, and that's the major factor going through if you want to have a good goal difference. So I think Aston Villa pretty much has everything in their hands. If they beat Celtic, they're going to be through, I think. There's a lot of teams on 13 points, but with a win, I'm sure they're going to go through the top 8. So
Villa playing Celtic at Villa Park, they obviously a much, much nicer game than having it at Celtic Park. And obviously, like we said, Atalanta are their hope for getting into that top 8. They need to beat Celtic by more than 2 than Leverkusen beat Sparta Prague. That's the only other opportunity for them to get into this top 8. But Villa have only scored 9 in the 7 games so far, and Celtic are no mugs. So, but Opta's supercomputer, I was looking earlier, they've given them a 52% chance of qualifying, which is higher than they've given Atalanta, which I was pretty surprised by. But, I mean, Villa's campaign has been so much better than they probably would have expected. Obviously, the Landmark game was the Bayern 1-0 at home in the second game. How impressed have you been with their first Champions League campaign in, I think, like 30, 40 years?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's still kind of, I know they've been European champions before, but this is still kind of new for most of their players playing in the Champions League. And now they got Duran. What do you think of Duran?
I think he's good, but he's good, but is he really good? Obviously West Ham made a bid for him last week, and my initial reaction to my mates was they should accept this straight away, because it feels like one of those players who is just hitting a really strong bit of form, but hasn't necessarily proven himself to be like a starting number 9. So for me, I think they want to cash in on him at the moment,
because they clearly don't want to get rid of Watkins. So plus, I'll tell you something interesting. So obviously I live in Chicago, and I used to work for the Fire here, for the football team. So I work in premium sales. So I was on the field for every game that Duran played. And I remember thinking, kid was 17 or 18. I'm thinking, how is he built like this? Like, you could tell right away how he runs, but his first touch was not there. But now when I look at him, how much he improved in those 2-3 years, it's crazy. So yeah, I think Villa should definitely take the money and reinvest that money, because I don't see a future for him when Watkins is still at Villa.
No, and I was speaking about this a few months ago. I saw Villa fans actually talking about how when Watkins has competition, he seems to fall off a cliff, and we've seen that this season. They were saying it happened when Ings was there and firing a few years ago. So I think it's the best. They get like 60, 70 million, which seems to be what they're asking for. I don't know why any team pays that unless they're insanely desperate when you're looking at other striker talent on the market. Yeah, exactly. West Ham are constantly trying to get that number 9. Yeah. So
I think he'll be great at West Ham. I think he will do great there.
I mean, it's a cursed position for them. They always seem to revert to Antonio, but they don't really have a choice while Antonio's injured. We don't know if he'll even return. We don't really know how bad this injury is from his car crash. So it makes sense. They wanted him in the summer. They should have got him. It would have been far cheaper as well. And it makes so much sense for a team like West Ham. I saw he was linked to Arsenal in the past few days. And if that's someone I want us to stay away from personally, he doesn't fix problems for us, in my opinion. But yeah.
I think Duran is a way better player than Antonio, and he hasn't even,
of course,
hit his peak, but he's still long time ahead of him. So we'll see how that goes for him. But I'm pretty sure he's going to be way better than Mikel Antonio.
Yeah.
So it seems like that kid has guts. You can tell he has fire in him, something that I've never seen in Mikel Antonio. So he definitely needs a player like him at West Ham.
Yeah. And just going back to the games Villa have had so far, I think the one game they'll look at and have regrets about and maybe a bit of sourness towards is the loss at Brugge. If you remember, it was a really weird penalty they got when Emi Martinez passed it to Tyrone Mings. He thought he was just giving him the ball to take the goal kick himself, something we saw in the Arsenal versus Bayern game in the knockouts last year. The referee gives a penalty this time, and ultimately they lose off that. Brugge were still the better team, but if they draw that game, they're on 14 points. You're looking at the situation completely different.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Villa did not show anything in that game. I watched that game as well. It was literally nothing dangerous coming from them. So I think most of the shots they took, it was like outside of the box. There was nothing really concrete. So, yeah. But yeah, I mean, you mentioned that. I didn't even realize they only scored 9 goals.
Yeah, so 3-0 win at Young Boys first week, the 1-0 against Bayern at home, 2-0 Bologna at home, who have had a terrible campaign when you compare it with how well they're doing in Serie A. The 1-0 loss against Brugge, as we just mentioned. 0-0 against Juve at home. That was a really tight game and pretty strong performances from both goalkeepers. And then you go complete opposite with the 3-2 away in Leipzig, where both keepers were really poor, but some really good goals as well, if you want to look at it from that perspective. And obviously the 1-0 loss at Monaco was really
less goals than Red Star Belgrade, which is shocking. Main teams. Yeah, that's actually crazy. Red Star Belgrade, 12 goals.
It's so funny though. We were just talking about how good Duran's been, how good Watkins can be, and you're looking at it going, they should have scored more. Like the only time they've scored 3 or more goals is Young Boys and then Leipzig. Like, I don't think they've had a particularly easy fixture list, so I have to give them a bit of grace for that. None of these teams, apart from Young Boys, are bad teams, but you'd expect a few more goals at least, especially at home when you're never going to have a better home Champions League atmosphere than in your returning season. So
I'm a little bit surprised by Unai Emery that he hasn't tried to play both at the same time. You should try it at least in one game. I don't think they've started both.
No, you only ever see it when he brings one of them off the bench and chasing a game.
He should give it a try, at least in the Champions League.
Yeah, we've seen as well how it's impacted their Premier League form. Their last 5 games, I believe it is, they've not, after a Champions League midweek game, they've not won. And I wrote in my notes after this weekend's games, their depth on paper isn't even that bad, which makes that stat really confusing to me. But I guess it's just taking more out of them than even they expected. And Jacob Ramsey said in his interview after the game, this is something we have to get used to if we want to play in these competitions. And I mean, maybe that will come and punish them this midweek against Celtic. Celtic have just lost Kyogo Furuhashi, then star striker to Rennes, but they've brought back a beloved winger in Jota. So it'll be an interesting how Celtic line up themselves. They're essentially guaranteed to be in the playoff spots. But this will be a really interesting game. I don't think it's guaranteed for Villa. And like we were saying, it's ultimately down to Atalanta.
Yeah, well, another thing is, why do you sell Diego Carlos as a center back when you know Mings is can get injured anytime, and that's what just happened. So now
Yeah,
you have to play over the weekend. They play Lucas Dean as a center back. That's another tricky situation for them.
yeah. I don't know. Do you think they'll get into the top 8? Because at the moment, I have a feeling Atalanta beat Barcelona.
I think they're gonna make it.
Okay.
I honestly think they're gonna make it.
Well,
Then you have Leverkusen as well, but they should get through Sparta Prague pretty easily.
That's the thing. It should be, the amount of teams on 13 points. There should be a really interesting battle for top 8. It's just, I mean, it's a bit unlucky with the scheduling, with how many of these teams are playing teams who are already like out of the competition. So it is, like we say, it is that one chance unless Leverkusen can't stop scoring and Villa suddenly just blitz Celtic. And I mean, this should be so much more exciting for that chunk of teams.
I think they'll find a way.
Okay.
I don't see Atalanta getting anything with Barcelona, especially because it's an away game, and Barcelona they have to play knowing that Arsenal, Inter behind them. They can afford to lose because that way they're going to lose a second spot, and you want to be 1 or 2. So, and I was looking
we'll
at
see.
On a schedule. They don't have anything like really tough in the next few games, so it's like they're not gonna. Yeah, they play Alaves on Sunday. They have Valencia on Thursday. Plenty of time to rest. So, yeah, they're gonna play a stronger team. So,
well, we'll see.
Everything is in their hands. Seems like.
Yeah. So we'll see and talk about it in tomorrow's podcast about how this ends up. It will be really interesting to watch, especially on the Goals Show. And it's time to hear about the Global Sports Podcast Network.
This podcast is part of the Global Sports This podcast is part of the Global Sports Podcast Network, the only network bringing you exclusive daily news and views on your Premier League team, the Premier League, women's football, and fantasy football. A unique listening experience that puts fans first, bringing you the very latest breaking news from your team. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and make us your first listen every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network. Every club, every day.
Thank you from Louis for those podcasts, ad reads. One final thing I wanted to touch on before we discuss how we feel the Champions League format's been. Stuttgart versus PSG, 24th versus 22nd. Stuttgart have a 2-point gap and are relying on City and Zagreb not to win, but a draw is enough for both teams. And I was looking at this, and the first thing that came to mind was the disgrace of Gijon, I think it's pronounced, at the 1982 World Cup, when a 1-0 win for West Germany versus Austria was enough for both to qualify. And I'm wondering if we see a very, very weird game of football when neither team is ultimately bothered about scoring.
Yeah, I mean, they can do that and calculate, but I think after that win for PSG last week, their confidence sky high. So I think they're going to win against Stuttgart. Especially, I don't rate Stuttgart this season. I watched the Red Star Belgrade game that they lost 5-1, and I'm thinking, how is this team even in the Champions League this year? And somehow they're on 3 wins now, so still in it.
A very weird team. They've got some really good players and really exciting players, but they haven't found any consistency in the Champions League this year.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I just feel like you might get this weird draw scenario where they both just go, fine, we'll settle for the draw. And then I'm looking at who might fall out, with City most likely winning against Brugge. And it feels like it's probably Sporting or Benfica for me. Because Sporting have fallen off a cliff since getting rid of Amorim. And, I mean, saying this after they beaten City would have been mental. They were sitting in the top 8. They're at home to Bologna. It'll be
Bologna is out, but I don't think they're going to play for sure because you still get money out for a win. Good money, especially for a team like Bologna. So they're not going to rest players. They're going to play their strongest team. So,
Bologna need to prove themselves as well a bit. We were saying before the last ad break, they're not as bad as this Champions League campaign has shown them to be. So Bologna have something to prove. And then the other team I'm looking at who could drop out, surprisingly, is Benfica, away to Juventus. Juventus need a win to try and get out of that group where they could be playing Real Madrid and Bayern. I don't think that's who they'll end up playing, because Real Madrid and Bayern have pretty easy games, but you want to finish as high up as possible, just in the chance you play a worse team, even with the weirdness happening with PSG and Man City down at the bottom there.
Yeah. Well, you do want to finish 9 to 16, so that way you play the second leg at home. So they're 17 now. They have something to play for. So I think Benfica is going to be out.
Yeah. I mean, if they drop out that game last week against Barca,
that was shocking. That was shocking. It could have gone the other way so easily, especially if the VAR just turned around and said that's a PK. I think, and they all play at the same time tomorrow, so this is gonna be just. Do you guys do you in England have like a goal zone where wherever there's a goal?
We've got a goal show on TNT, which I think that'll be my main screen even with Arsenal playing, because we should be fine.
I'm for sure gonna be on the Golasso show. That's what we have in the US. So
I mean, I think that leads us perfectly on to how have you found this format? You said earlier your friends don't love it, but you've been loving it so far.
I absolutely love it. You play, 8 different teams. It's not like before you play like literally just 3 teams, and it gets boring after round 4, especially for the big teams. If you already clinched the playoff, this is way better. I think it's more exciting, and they're gonna realize tomorrow how exciting it is once you get to the last game. And
I think, speaking from an Arsenal perspective, last year we came back into the competition and we got a group where PSV were the hardest team we played. I think it was PSV, Sevilla, and the final team escapes me right now. But it was like, oh, well, we've just spent years in the Europa League and it feels like we just got a Europa League group again. And now we've played PSG, we played Inter, we played Monaco. You're playing these higher profile teams, and I think also getting these reps against these harder teams going into the knockouts is so important, because when we then got into the knockouts last year, Porto, the way they set up was really difficult for how Arsenal play. But then Bayern, that first leg, especially like the start of the first leg, it looked like we were the better team. Going into that game, we were the favourites because of the two teams' form. And ultimately, it felt like playing a big team, which we hadn't done in so long, was ultimately the biggest problem. We didn't have that knockout football experience or playing a team of Bayern's calibre. And it gives you more reps against those big teams in this format. So I think that's been a massive bonus of it. We got to play Inter, who I've been interested in us playing just because of the styles of play. Yeah. I'm with you. I think it's been really exciting. There are a couple drawbacks, but it's so much more exciting than a group stage, which is done after 4 games.
Yeah. If I made a decision how the draw should be, I would have made a slight difference. So let's say if you finish first, then in the last 16, you get the lowest seeded team. So let's say if you have 9 and 23 playing, then if 23 wins and that's the lowest, then number 1 gets that team rather than doing the other combinations. That's the format here in the NFL and American football, and I think that's a good format to have, especially for knockout, because you don't want to, if you finish first and obviously you played 8 games, you won all games, you want to be in charge and you want to play the lowest possible team going through from the playoffs.
Yeah,
even like this, it's super interesting.
Yeah, I was looking at how the bracket works, and it's like, this is so much more complicated than it needs to be. Like, I'm fine with the top 8 not having to play extra games. I think that's something to strive for amongst those teams and makes this final game week more interesting, and I think we'll see that in future years. Ultimately, this is the first year; it's not always going to be like this. So I think that's an interesting thing to have teams play for. But the 9th place, 23rd or 24th, like you don't need to make it that complicated. Just 9th versus 24th, 10th versus 23rd.
Yep,
and
that's what I was thinking.
They play first. They play first. They play second in terms of like that middle cluster. They've completely overcooked that aspect of it. But I mean, the seeding is going to be really interesting as well. I don't really know what to expect, and I think some people have more of a problem with that than the league phase actually, because you get almost these manufactured easy runs, and you don't get these. Oh, we're getting Real Madrid versus Man City in the round of 16, the quarterfinals. Like these are the two favourites for the competition, and one of them's gone already. And all those sides of the brackets, like we've had in the last 2 years, where one half of the bracket is completely loaded with all the good teams, and the other is like last year where we had PSG, we had a bad Barcelona team, we had some Italian teams. I think that's an area where more people have a problem with it.
Yeah, I mean it's too many draws, to be honest with you. So you have one on Friday now for the playoffs, then you have another one where you're gonna have like the final shape for the bracket, and then you have another one for the quarters and semis who's gonna play the second leg at home. So you can definitely simplify that.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised if they make adjustments going into this. I'll be interested to see as well if they allow teams next year to register their January signings, because I was familiar with this format before this year because of Football Manager, and in that they allowed you to register your players. So I just assumed that was how it would be for this, but we've seen it with City; they've not been allowed to register their players, and I don't know how I feel about that, because you should be able to give yourself that chance in the final 2 games with the signings you can make in January. But at the same time, should you just have to fight it out? Especially if you're, I mean, maybe it's because it's a big team, it gets more focus. But I think that will be interesting to see if they change that in the future as well.
I think they will. There'll be always something new, I think, with UEFA.
What are you looking forward to most in the games tomorrow? Is it, for me, it's that middle cluster of who might Arsenal draw in, like, who could we be playing? Because I mean, Liverpool and Barca fans at the moment, they must be looking at it going, like, why do we have to play potentially Bayern, Real Madrid, Juve? Like I said earlier, I don't think it will end up being those teams, but you finish first, potentially they're going to win 8 from 8 games just to get one of the hardest possible draws.
Right.
For me, that's the most interesting part of this, because like I was saying, I don't think there'll be much change in the top 8 or too much drama with City. Is that the most interesting part for you?
I think the game that I'm going to watch tomorrow is Aston Villa on my tablet, and then I'll have the Golasso show on my TV, so that way I can keep an eye on every other game. But Villa is the most important, most interesting game for me, to be honest with you, because I want them to go through, but I also know there's so much more into it. So,
yeah,
who do you think is going to win the Champions League this year? Obviously, as an Arsenal fan, try not to be biased.
I mean, it's really hard to look past Liverpool at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it feels quite easy to say Liverpool and Barca, but they've looked the best. The problem with Barca is we've seen how easily they can be punished, especially in La Liga. They've had really bad runs, especially before the winter break or Super Cup break. So I'm looking at Liverpool. I feel like there's not been enough talk about Inter. I don't think they're as good as they were last year necessarily, but
you can never
the way they play, the strikers
Italians.
they have. Yeah, I think they're a really interesting team. And like we were saying earlier, if City have accidentally given themselves a somewhat easy run, they can't be ignored. Rodri's not going to come back, but if they can find a way, especially if they're going to find a way to play more transitionally, I think it was just a one-off game personally, but we'll have to see as the months progress. I don't think you can never look past them.
Yeah.
From an Arsenal
I'll put them in
perspective,
top 3, to be honest with you. If City makes it somehow through, they're gonna be an issue for other teams. Liverpool. Here's the thing about Liverpool. What that worries me: all these contract situations. The deeper you get into the end of the season, if they're not resolved, it can always go wrong. If there's something in the media saying Salah is trying to go to Saudi Arabia or something for the money, and obviously he wants to be in a Muslim country, he said that before, and then Trent, something else comes out, and then out of nowhere, the atmosphere in the locker room is not the same anymore. So that can cause trouble for Liverpool, even in the Premier League. So,
yeah, that's what I've been looking at all season. Like if they don't, like you say, if they don't get these sorted, it
has to be
sours the
sorted as soon
camp.
as possible. Yeah.
Yeah, I know the FSG is selling a minority stake in the Pittsburgh Penguins. It's a bit of a tangent. Who are my like ice hockey team? It's like it feels like they're selling a stake to try and afford these 3 contracts at the moment. But I mean, yeah, are Liverpool your favourite still though? Despite that,
No, not anymore. To be honest with you, I would put Madrid still there, and even Bayern. So
yeah, Madrid's such a weird one.
I would rule out
It feels like
Barcelona.
they've worked it out now though.
I think Barcelona just will find a way to mess up when it matters.
Yeah,
This season.
I think the system will ultimately cost them eventually. I think it's like if they play in Atletico Madrid in the knockouts, I feel like they could get punished.
I love Atletico Madrid. To be honest with you, yeah.
I mean,
Who
looking
else
at
would
Arsenal
be-
selfishly, if we did anything this window, I'd have a bit more faith. I think the fact that we're straight into round of 16 and by then we should have Saka back gives an ounce of hope to Arsenal, but it's ultimately going to be down to what happens in these final few days of the window for me in terms of Arsenal. I think we'll get to quarters, and it ultimately depends who we play and whether Havertz can actually have confidence and score in that period of the season. So, but yeah, I think Liverpool, Real Madrid, who have figured it out, and City and probably Inter feel like the top 4 at the moment.
Arsenal, I think, has one issue: the number 9. If you get a bigger number 9 that's gonna score for you 25, 30 goals, this Arsenal team is golden. So that's one issue. I don't know why they're not going more aggressively towards getting someone like Gyökeres, but I think there's something in the background that we don't know what it is. Maybe Gyökeres is getting ready for United, or Sporting's asking for too much money. They don't want to get rid of him right now. They want to end the season. I don't know what it is, but yeah, Arsenal needs a number 9. Even Osimhen would be great, I think, for Arsenal. They need that
Arsenal's
type of
such a fascinating one. I don't know if we've got time to discuss it, but the fact he's in Turkey, there's got to be something else to it that teams haven't like latched onto him, because his profile is perfect for Arsenal. Like what? Like there's got to be a reason that we just
there's a lot of money in
like,
Turkey
publicly aware to.
There's a lot of money in Turkey,
but there's more money in the Premier League, arguably. Like, yeah, I mean that's
I
gonna be.
never understood that transfer. How he ended up from. It was like destined to go to a really big club, and then ended up going to Turkey at this time of his career. He's still at prime right now.
I mean, I think that will essentially wrap us up. We've got our favourites for the Champions League this season. Will Villa find a way tonight to get into that top 8? Could City not quite get over the line? I think that would be so much fun for everyone except City fans. Yeah. But Victor, thank you for joining me for your first podcast with the Daily Premier League podcast. I hope it's been good for you.
Yeah, better than I expected. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it, and I'm sure we'll do plenty more.
Yeah, and join us again tomorrow for a review of the Champions League. We'll have more knowledge of what these possible matchups could be. And subscribe to the podcast, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
See you guys soon.
Every club, every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.